Today is the 29th of December. Today is the anniversary of the Wounded Knee Massacre that happened in Wounded Knee Creek in South Dakota. This was a massacre in which an estimated 350 Lakota men, women, and children and old people from the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, as well as the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, and there was a little bit from Rosebud. These were Indians that were fleeing for their lives, and they were stopped at Wounded Knee Creek by the reformed 7th Cavalry, United States. And the cavalry surrounded them in the valley, and their guns were taken from them, and the cavalry shot everyone that they could. It's a very sad time, and that basically ended the so-called Indian Wars between Indian tribes and the United States government. So it is a very somber day for those that like to take the time to honor and remember them and try to learn from this incident. A lot of people do this in an unhealthy way, and they end up hating white people because of this. But that is racism. That's not justice. And hating white people because of this, it does not bring peace. It does not bring justice. It actually goes against Lakota beliefs to hate somebody just because of the color of their skin. And we have this basic concept called mitakuya oyasing, which means we're all related, all my relations. But the Star Knowledge definition says that there's a universe inside of you, and that's all connected to each other. Everything inside of you is connected, just like you are connected to everything around you. You're connected to other people, plants, animals, the earth, the sky, everything. But it all begins within you. In our ancestors' way, they took care of themselves so that they could have care for everything around them, have compassion for everything around them. Before you can do that, you have to have compassion for yourself. You have to have peace inside of yourself. That's where it begins. Seek for peace first within yourself. Then you have a clear mind. In the 1800s, back in those days, you could not leave the reservation. It was like a prison camp. It was tough. We couldn't hunt anymore. We couldn't do anything. And we were facing starvation. It was a very, very difficult time. Now I want to take your attention to a place called Nevada. And this is in the United States, of course, the western part. They're very closely located to Utah. Utah lies just to the east of Nevada. At that time period, Utah was settled by the Mormon church predominantly. Well, a tribe over there called the Paiute Nation. It's a whole different nation. It's a whole different culture. Not all Indians are the same. Please keep that in mind. We are not the same. Now, this is a different tribe. A different language, different culture, different ceremonies, different everything. Well, there was a man there by the name of Jack Wilson back in the 1880s. Now, Jack Wilson was a Paiute Indian who could read and write English. He was educated. And since they're very located closely to where the Mormons are, he became knowledgeable of Mormon doctrine. Now, the Mormons have a belief system that's very interesting. Now, I don't want to give a discussion on Mormonism, but what I'm going to say is very important because it does play a role that results in the Wounded Knee Massacre. The Mormons believe that after Jesus comes to the earth the second time in resurrected form, that this is the last day on earth, and that the earth goes through a change. And no matter how old you are, you grow to the age of 32 years old. And when you get to 32 years old, you stay there for 1,000 years. Okay? So if you're an old man and your body is ready to give up the ghost, when that moment comes, suddenly something happens to your body and there's no more blood flowing in you, and you become in a state that's between human and resurrected form. But you're not resurrected yet. Not yet. And at that time, your body starts to go backwards in age. So let's say, for example, we have a man who's 90 years old. And just at the point that he dies, his body changes. There's no more blood in him. And now his body becomes slowly perfect. If he didn't have an arm, now he's going to grow one. That's what I mean, for example. And now he starts to age backwards until he looks like he's 32 years old. And then from that moment, he stays 32 years old until Judgment Day. Yeah, Judgment Day is 1,000 years after Christ comes. This is a Mormon belief. Also, after the second coming of Christ, wherever there's dead bodies, the earth pushes them up. It's like they come back to life in a certain way. It's like the example I said with the old man. There's no blood in their bodies, but their flesh comes back and they're healthy again. And if they're older than 32 when they died, they're going to, again, just like the 90-year-old guy, they're going to age backwards until they reach the age of 32. Okay? Now, if anybody is younger than 32, whether they're alive after the second coming or the earth gives up these dead bodies and puts some life back into them, it doesn't matter. Each case is the same. If they were younger than 32, their bodies become healthy, for one thing. There's no blood in them. And suddenly, they're really, really healthy people. And then they start aging normally. But once they hit the age of 32, then it stays like that. So you see, by the time this 1,000 years is over, everybody looks like they're 32 years old. For example, women who maybe they lost children in birth or just maybe the child died or something. Now they have the chance to raise that child because that child comes back as a baby. And now they have the chance to raise that child. See, the Mormons use these kind of stories to appeal to your emotions. They want to keep you, just like all other churches. They do the same thing. They keep you in an emotion. They want you to be in an emotion to get to your heart so that you stay there. That goes against natural law. In Lakota star knowledge, emotions bring peace. That's all they do. You're not supposed to live in the emotion. You have an experience, the experience has an emotion with it. Well, you have to learn from that experience, and as you do that, that emotion starts to go away, and it's replaced by peace. That means it's bringing peace. And you're at peace with it, and you don't have that emotional attachment anymore. And now you've received wisdom. So emotions, you're not supposed to live in the emotion. That's what I'm saying. But with religions, they want you to live in the emotion. That's how they get you to enslave yourself. That's just a side note here. Now let me go back to this Mormon belief. So after the end of this 1,000 years, after the second coming, everybody looks like they're 32 years old. Everybody's the same age. No children. Then everybody stands before God and gets judged, whether you go to heaven or someplace else. Basically, this is the belief. All right? This is important concerning this Jack Wilson. All right? Again, Jack Wilson was a Paiute man that was very knowledgeable of Mormon beliefs. And this is the one that he used. So he had this idea to form his own religion. And in his religion, he created a song and a dance and called it the Ghost Dance. And to get people to believe him, he said to them everything they wanted to hear. Remember, at that time, Indians are really in a bad shape. There's poverty. It's illegal to do our ceremonies. It's illegal to speak our language. It's really not a good situation. And so he creates a religion. He says, if you do my dance, all the white people will go away. They will just disappear. And all the buffalo will come back. And all the dead people that were killed by the white people will come back to life. He said, I had this vision. I was in the clouds, and I was walking up there, and there was this rainbow entrance. I walked through there, and there were 7 teepees, he said. He went inside one teepee, and he said, my grandfathers were all sitting in there, 7 generations, and they all looked the same. They were all the same age. He went to the other teepees, and those were grandfathers that came even before, that were born even before. So 7 teepees, each having 7 grandfathers. They had 49 generations of grandfathers, and they all looked the same age. This is what he said. Can you see where he's getting the idea from? He's getting it from the Mormon Church. So he says, all you have to do is do this dance and sing these songs, and the white people will disappear, and the buffalo will come back. And all your relatives that were killed by white people will come back too. The Indians were broken-hearted, and they were in poverty. They were not getting enough protein in their bodies, so they were becoming weak-minded. Now they're ready to be brainwashed. The churches knew this. That's why they wanted to come in and brainwash them immediately. That's why today most Indians are Christian or Christian influenced. See, Wovoka, or Jack Wilson, knew this too. That's why he wanted to start his own church, his own religion. And this is what he was preaching. He said what the people wanted to hear. Now the people were so weak-minded, they didn't realize that what he was saying, there's no way in hell that that can happen. How do the white people just disappear? By this time, America has got hundreds of thousands of white people. How are they all going to just disappear? That doesn't make sense. But people were so weak-minded that they believed it. So now this movement started to spread throughout the United States. This is called the Ghost Dance movement. America didn't really pay attention to it. They didn't think anything of it. Now, Wovoka, I keep saying Wovoka. First of all, let me talk about that name. Like I said, the man's name is Jack Wilson. But when he started his religion, the way he got his followers was that this guy could read and write English. So he could read newspapers. And even back then, the scientists knew when there was going to be a lunar or solar eclipse. So he read about that there was an upcoming solar eclipse. The moon was going to pass in front of the sun. He knew this because he read it in the newspaper. So he told his people, he said, to prove to you that my religion is true, he said, I'm going to make the sun disappear. He told them when it was going to happen. They thought he was crazy. Well, that day came, so he got in front of the people, assembled them. He said, okay, now the sun is going to disappear. And a few minutes, the daylight kind of changed a little bit, and then people started to freak out. And then it got kind of dark. That's when the moon passed in front of the sun. And then people start getting scared. So they prayed to him, bring it back, they were saying. So then he said, okay, I'll bring it back. Then they started to get light again. So these people thought that Jack Wilson did that. But in reality, that was just a solar eclipse. Anybody who could read and write could read about it in the newspaper. They knew when it was going to happen. But most of the Indians, they couldn't read. So they didn't know. So that's why Jack Wilson used this knowledge against his own people to trick them into making him their prophet. So after that, they believed him, and they started to do his ghost dance religion. The word spread, and then people were coming and learning it. And whenever Jack Wilson would receive visitors, he would give them a peyote tea. They didn't know it, because you can't taste it. So then he would teach them these songs and dances, and they would start to hallucinate. But he would use the power of suggestion. So he might say, you see that pink teepee in the sky? And they look up and they say, oh yeah. It was just power of suggestion under the influence of a hallucinogen. That's all it was. But people believed it. So when word got around to South Dakota area, some Lakota people started to wonder about that. So they sent a Lakota delegation over there. It was from Cheyenne River, Standing Rock, Pine Ridge, and Rosebud, Lower Brule. This delegation went over there to visit him. He welcomed them. Right away gave them peyote tea, and they didn't know it. And he started suggesting things to them, and they would see it because they were under the influence of a hallucinogen. They were taking drugs. They didn't know it. By this time, Jack Wilson changed his name to Wovoka. And so the people, they didn't know what to make of it. They didn't know if he was really a prophet or is he like a magician. They didn't trust him. But they came back anyway and told this to the people. And not everybody believed it. Most Lakota people thought it was bullshit. They were like, that's ridiculous. That doesn't even make sense, what he said. But those that were really shattered mentally, they believed it. So only a handful of Lakota people did this. Most Lakota people didn't do it because it didn't make sense. So please keep that in mind. The ghost dance religion is not a Lakota ceremony. There's nothing Lakota about that whatsoever. This is a false prophet that tricked his own people into believing that he was a prophet. And he's using peyote to induce hallucinations and calling it a vision. And in the Lakota way, we don't need a hallucinogen to have a vision. We don't need that. Nobody does. So, those who practiced this ghost dance religion, there were just a little bit, but still it got the Indian agents worried. The Indian agents are government workers from Washington, D.C. They are white, and they watch over the reservation, so to speak. And they started getting concerned. They thought that the Indians were getting ready to go on a warpath. So they called, Washington, D.C., send more military. We think the Indians are going to do battle again. By that time, the 7th Cavalry had reformed. They were wiped out in 1876 at Little Bighorn Battle. They were wiped out by Lakota and Cheyenne warriors under the direction of Chief Sitting Bull from the Hunkpapa Lakota from Standing Rock Sioux Reservation. He was the one that guided that, and Crazy Horse was also there. And that 7th Cavalry was totally wiped out. So people who were rebuilding that cavalry, they had an extreme hatred for Indians. They wanted revenge for Custer. So they were sent to the Dakotas to keep an eye, see what are the Indians doing. So now we have the reformed 7th Cavalry, and they want revenge for Custer's massacre. Now around this time, in December 15th, Sitting Bull was assassinated by the Indian policeman working under the Indian agent, who was a white man. And Sitting Bull's people got scared. They didn't know what to do. They thought they might be killed next, so they fled to Cheyenne River, to a community called Cherry Creek. This is a very old community. And they met with the people there. And there was a chief that was named Sicangu. This means Bigfoot. It's not after the monster. So they ran down there. They already broke the law, because remember what I said, in those days you can't leave the reservation. So they came to Cheyenne River Reservation and met with Chief Bigfoot, and they told him the news. Sitting Bull was dead. So Chief Bigfoot said, now that our really powerful chief is dead, the United States might try to do something. Now by this time on Pine Ridge Reservation, we have a chief by the name of Red Cloud that assimilated into American society extremely fast. And his people surrendered. They were the first to surrender to the reservation. And they put their teepees near the forts and would basically beg to the military for food. And to show that they were loyal to the military, Red Cloud had Crazy Horse killed. It was Red Cloud's people who assassinated Crazy Horse. And so they did that so that the government would look favorably on Red Cloud and his people. See, Red Cloud went against his own people too. But the thing is, the government listens to Red Cloud because he has his nose so far up their ass, they will listen to him. So Chief Bigfoot, back on Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation, he said to Sitting Bull's people, let's go meet with Red Cloud. And we'll tell Red Cloud to tell the military we just want peace. We do not want to go to war. So they decided to do that because nobody was listening to them. They might get killed without even being asked questions. They were fearing for their lives. So, like I said, they weren't thinking too good back then because it was a hard time. A lot of depression, so they couldn't think too good. So they thought that was a good idea because Red Cloud is a big friend to the white people, to the government at this time. So they flee towards Pine Ridge Reservation, but they don't make it. They're stopped in this place called Wounded Knee Creek, and it's winter time and it's blizzarding. South Dakota blizzards are horrendous and very, very cold. Strong, strong winds. And these Lakota people didn't have much, so they were freezing. So when they got stopped at Wounded Knee Creek, it just so happened that that was the 7th Cavalry that stopped them. The reformed 7th Cavalry, Custer's old regiment. So they went in and they take their weapons away and stuff like that. And through an interpreter, Chief Bigfoot said, "We just want peace. We want to speak to Red Cloud to tell him to tell you guys that we just want peace. Don't want the war. We are not going to war." But the 7th Cavalry, they had revenge on their mind. So they surrounded this camp and started firing into it. And they killed a lot of people that way. These were all ghost dancers. They believed the words of Wovoka. So their ghost dance medicine man, his name was Kicking Bird, he had a vision in which bullets were coming towards them, but they were all wearing certain kind of shirts. And so when he came out of his dream, it was just a dream, he told the people to make these shirts. And he said, if you make these shirts, the bullets will just bounce off. They won't even touch. And you will live forever. So when they got stopped at the Wounded Knee Creek, and as the cavalry was starting to fire into their group, they start putting on their ghost dance shirts. And they dropped like flies. The bullets went right through and killed them. During that massacre, evidently Kicking Bird kept throwing dirt on himself and was crying around. And people were saying, well, what about your dream now? Everybody's dying. The bullets are going right through the shirt. So in the last few minutes of their lives, some of them were getting mad because they realized that Kicking Bird tricked them. As the massacre was happening, people were running around and getting shot from behind and so forth. And some women, they hid their babies in other places, and then they got killed. But some people, they put their children on horses, and they tied the children to the stomach of the horse, such as the belly under the horse, and then they whipped the horse so it ran away. So when you see this horse running away, you think it's just a normal horse, and you're not even aware that there's a kid under there. So these horses just ran and ran and ran until somebody found them. And this happened. A lot of these children made it back to Cheyenne River, to a little community, and today that community is called Hakini. These are the descendants of the survivors. These are children who made it back. It goes to show you the resiliency of little children. Yeah, little children tied to the stomach of a horse. So they saw these horses running in, they stopped them, and they looked underneath, and there's a little kid under there. So they warmed the kid up really quick, and the children were telling the people what happened. That's how they knew there was a massacre. So the 7th Cavalry did their dirty deed, and then that time a blizzard came in, really, really powerful. So they had to just leave everything out and go back to their fort. When the blizzard was gone, about 2 days later, everybody went out there. The Indians and whites went out there. And the military was there, and they somehow dug this huge rectangular grave, and they just started throwing bodies in there, just like trash. And then some of the soldiers, they wanted to take souvenirs, so they were taking these ghost dance shirts, and they were taking beadwork and things from the dead Indians so that they could sell it to the museums. And this one guy found a dead baby, frozen baby, and he was trying to get the moccasins off, and one couldn't come off. It froze to the baby's skin because the baby was shot. He couldn't peel off the moccasin, so he cut the foot off. And he sold this foot to a museum in Kansas. So that foot was in the museum. Can you imagine that? This foot was on display. That's Western civilization. These are the kind of things they did to the dead Indians. And they just threw them in there like trash. And they were buried in a mass grave, and it's still there. Now let me repeat this one more time. The Indians that are in this grave, they are not Oglala. They are not from Pine Ridge. They are from Standing Rock, Sioux, Cheyenne River, Sioux, and the Rosebud Sioux reservations. They're not Oglalas. They are not from Pine Ridge. So all you Europeans that go over there as tourists, keep that in mind. The people that are in that grave are not from Pine Ridge. So one of these ghost dancers ended up all the way into Scotland. All the way to Scotland. Back in the 1990s, there was a person in Scotland that was looking through the things that they have in their museum, one of the museums there, and he found this ghost dance shirt and had no idea what it was. By this time, there was internet, so she started looking around, and she found something like it. And so she realized that this is coming from people from the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe. So she contacted people from the reservation I'm from, which is Cheyenne River Sioux, and they made the arrangements, and they sent a Lakota delegation to Scotland, and the city wanted to give it back. They don't even know how they got it. There was no paperwork, but they wanted to give it back. Because, see, people on a reservation, I want you to know something. Not all white people are the same. People in Ireland and the people of Scotland, they're very tribal. They come from a culture called the Celtics. And they had a sweat lodge. They had ceremonies too. And the churches wiped out their religion too. And did their best to wipe out their language. The same thing happened to them that's happening to us. So don't be thinking all white people are the same. They're not. It's just like Indians. Not all Indians are the same either. We have our assholes too. So keep that in mind. So the shirt was returned to Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation with ceremony. It was a really beautiful thing. So they're still trying to locate things and get them back. And they finally were able to return this foot of that little girl I told you about too. That got returned as well. But you know what? Museums really fight to keep their collection. It's so amazing, that they do that. The museums in America have so many bones of Indian people that there's more bones of Indian people in these museums than there are of Indians living today. It's crazy. What a world, yeah? There's just a lot of sadness around that event. Just a lot of sadness. And people sometimes, they hate white people because of that. They blame all white people for that, and that's incorrect to do that, because I just said not all white people are the same. And same thing holds true for Indians. Not all Indians are good people. This is the tragic event. This is what happened. Around that Wounded Knee Creek, people would hear things. They would hear crying, they would hear strange noises, and nobody's there. So back in the 80s, somebody had a vision about that, and they decided to do a memorial ride. So they start from the area where Sitting Bull lived, near Little Eagle, South Dakota, and they have a ride. They ride horses from there all the way to the massacre site. They do that to honor their ancestors that died there. And it's really a lot of information. I mean, a lot of interesting things happen when they're riding out in the country. I've had several students of mine were part of this ride. It's really interesting to hear them talk about it. It's quite spiritual. It's quite emotional. So they arrive in the morning on December 29th at this area every year. Yeah, they do this ride. Now there's all kinds of survivor stories, children who still remembered what they saw just before everybody was killed. For one thing, there's several accounts of a priest coming to the Indian people, and he's giving them the last rites. They have no idea that that's happening. The children, they show example, and they tell how the man was dressed, what he was doing, and so they figured out that he was giving them the last rites. This means that the military already had it planned that they were going to kill everybody there. That was their intention all along. Now, after this massacre, all these military people that were there, they all got medals of honor, congressional medals of honor from the President of the United States back then. And the media called it the Battle at Wounded Knee Creek. And these reporters, they were not even there, but they wrote like they were. So they made it look like the Indians were very vicious and were on the warpath. And that wasn't even true. You know, I remember when I was a little boy and looking in the history book, one time I got the idea, I think I must have been about 11 years old, and I started to wonder, I wonder if this book says anything about Indians. So I looked in the index of the book, looking for Indians, and this American history book, it just had one paragraph about Indians. And that one paragraph was the Wounded Knee Massacre. And it called it the Battle of Wounded Knee. They were calling it a battle. So it wasn't until recently that they changed that to Massacre at Wounded Knee, or the Wounded Knee Massacre. It's crazy, yeah? Just taking some moments here to think about that. That's just unreal that something like that could happen. If you ever go to that massacre site, I'm going to tell you something. You're never going to be the same. I almost advise you not to go. Because some people, it messes them up really bad for years. Because you feel all that energy there. People go there and they leave things on the grave. And what always gets me every time when I go there is when you see a little toy. That somebody left a toy for the children that were killed. Or a candy. That always gets at my heart. That just pulls on my emotions, and I lose it when I see that. When you're a parent and you love your children and you care for them, it's going to really break your heart when you see something like that. Little children are massacred at this incident. And just think, The survivors were little children. Yeah. Some were found in bushes. There's a very well-known documented case where they found one. It was still suckling its mother's breast. The mother was dead. And the baby was trying to still suckle. And they found children that were cut up in pieces. And it's just horrendous what they found. You really have to be careful when you look at this, because you have an emotion, express it, but don't hurt anybody, especially yourself. It does make you feel a certain way, and you've got to let that emotion come out. But then you have to come to peace. It doesn't mean you forget it. You just have to come to peace with it. You have to really be careful that you don't develop racism because of this. Because it's so easy to hate. So we have to really watch ourselves when we learn about these things or think about these things. And it is sad. It's really, really sad. And then we have to come to peace with it. This is how we honor those people. So after they did a 100th anniversary ride back in 1990, and they did a ceremony. It's part of the Narigluha ceremony, that's keeping and releasing the soul. There's a small part of the ceremony called wiping the tears. And that's when you close off the ceremony. That's when you release. Yeah. So they did this at that area. And since that time, nobody's heard any weird noises in that area. Nobody's heard any crying. They died very traumatically. That energy was still there. So they had to release that. And that's what they did for them. So since that time, as I said, there hasn't been any crying that they heard or anything like that. They're at peace now. They've continued. They moved on. And we have to somehow do that too. We don't forget them. It's not about forgetting them. It's about honoring them. And we have to come to peace with it too when we learn this incident. Otherwise, it's going to damage us. We might become a racist. We might go into depression. And we're stuck in an emotion. See? That's why I said we have to come to peace with it so that we process it, we learn from it. That's the big word here. That we learn from it as much as we can so peace can enter us. And we can be at peace with this. And we can honor them every year. And that's why I do this show on this day for them, to honor them. And to try to get the message out there. What would they have wanted for you? They want you to live your life as good as you can. And that starts within yourself. That starts by taking care of your four parts, your physical body, your mind, your emotions, and your soul. They want you to eat right. They want you to exercise. They want you to pray. They want you to take care of yourself. This way you honor them. You honor yourself, and you honor your descendants. Your children will learn from you, and you've created a healing tradition. It's the same tradition of your ancestors. That's love. That's how you truly love. Unconditionally love. It all begins within. Taking care of yourself. Coming to peace. That way, when you communicate with others, that peace flows to them. It influences them. It touches them. It embraces them. They feel good. And then maybe they will do that too. That's the tradition of life. This is how we were created. This is what we were designed for. This is what I really want to emphasize as much as possible. The key word here is to learn from it. Learn from it. Always hug your children. Always tell them you love them. They need to hear that. It's so important. No matter what language you speak, your children, they need to hear those words coming out of your mouth that you love them. That is so important. That is so, so important. So, if all you do is blame the white man for this or the white man for that, then you're really doing a dishonor to your ancestors. There's good and bad, no matter where you go. There's good and bad in every race. There's good and bad in every culture. Stupidity knows no skin color. So you have to be really careful. You don't just think about all the negative things. You have to start thinking about your contribution to that cause. What are you going to contribute? Are you going to just continue hating white people just because of all this historical sadness, these historical events that happened? Are you going to just continue to say, I hate the Washichu because of that? Then you're not going anywhere. Your soul is not developing. And you are dishonoring the ancestors. You're dishonoring Grandmother Earth. Because Grandmother Earth loves every one of us the same. She doesn't favor anybody. When she calls us to safety, she doesn't just talk to Lakota people. She talks to everybody. Everybody drinks water. Everybody needs earth, wind, fire. And we all bleed red. We all need food to live. This comes from our Grandmother Earth. She doesn't favor others over us. She doesn't see skin color. And we shouldn't either. We're all Ikja'oyata. We're all designed to communicate with each other. So that's why I said it's really hard when you grow up in a society where there is hatred, and you have to deal with that. And a lot of people don't. They don't deal with it in a healthy way, and the racism goes back and forth. And that doesn't do anybody any good. But it's really hard to be fair, especially when everybody around you is not. I understand that. But you have a responsibility to yourself, so you have to think about that and say, okay, you know, with our lives, we are making a contribution to society. Whether we know it or not, we are. So what are you going to do with your contribution? How are you going to do that? That's very important, because you are here. Show your ancestors some honor by living it in a healthy way. This day is a sad day, but I choose to remember them and honor them and do things to influence people, to communicate to each other, to fellowship one another, regardless of what their skin color is. That's what I choose to do. That's my contribution. Because that's in line with this Mitake Oyasi. We're all connected to each other. That means we're a global organism. And your body, if there's one part of your body that gets ill, it affects the entire body. Everything is important. It's all connected to each other. This is what our body's teaching us. It's teaching us that we are also all connected to each other. That every one of us is important. That means our grandmother Earth loves us all the same. The ghost dance religion, that was a Native American cult. It was using drugs to make you hallucinate, to make you think you had a vision. The reality is true visions do not come by using hallucinogens that induce hallucinations. That's not a vision. That's a hallucination. True healing begins within each and every one of you. That you got to come to peace with yourself first before you can come to peace with this. Because reality begins within. And if you don't come to peace within yourself first, and then you look at incidents like this Wounded Knee Massacre, then you might become a racist, or you might go into depression. And you can avoid that by coming to peace with yourself first. This is how you can show honor to these people who were killed at that massacre.
To read more about Lakota Star Knowledge spirituality, you can read my book called Wichocha Otechike. You can see the book cover on the right side of this screen. This book contains the information to what I talk about on my Lakota spirituality videos. To purchase this book, please click below where it says Show More. Clicking on that link will open up the description below. And there you will see a link called To Purchase My Books. As you will see, it's an eBay link. Click on that eBay link and there you will see the information to get this book. Lila Pila Mayelo. Thank you very much.